we've been trying to time some of our tag deployments with when the Navy is actually out there doing real Navy exercises and capturing any response to the actual sonar from a ship, which again will tend to be much louder but much more distant. And I'll show you some of those results in a second. We have been working with a variety of species, and you use kind of different approaches. For example, this is deploying a tag on a fin whale, using a little bit more where we've had to kind of, fin whales often are a little faster, so we're maneuvering up to get into position and then deploying the tag, again in this case the D tag, on the fin whale right there.
Is this just a mechanical force that makes the suction work?
Yeah, so the question was, is it just mechanical force? So the early critter cam, that one I showed you, actually uses active suction. It was a bigger suction cup, and it was actually set up to a suction system. The tag had to be held in place. These tags are much kind of smaller. I didn't bring one of the ones with the small suction cups on it, but you know, what do I have? You know, this is actually one of the larger ones we currently use here. That we mostly attach with suction cups. This is a GPS tag, and I'll show you some of the results of that. But they're small enough that we can actually use very small suction cups that actually require very little force. You just kind of just plop it on the whale and it sticks on. The suction cups are the ideal thing for short. I mean, the average deployment time is about 4 hours. So we're not talking very long-term data. The trade-off, you get a satellite tag that travels away and that you never get back. You can only get very, very little data from it. You can get maybe long-term data from it, but what can be transmitted up to the satellite is a minimal bandwidth of information. So typically you're getting very crude location and at best a summary of some of the dive data. But with some of these tags, like the typical tags that I just showed you we were deploying there, sample it typically 200 or 300 times a second. They're recording the depth, 3-dimensional accelerometer, 3-dimensional magnetometer, and I'll show you how we can fully reconstruct the underwater movements of the animals on a very fine scale. But that's all because now all the data is just getting recorded on the tag. And what's the catch there? Well, you've got to get the tag back to get that, but it does open up quite a bit more information. I'll show you just a couple of other examples tagging a sperm whale. Again, very different with each of these species. This is an adult male sperm whale. We named it Mango because it turns out in our VRS study we encountered adult male sperm whales repeatedly. It turned out to always be the same adult male sperm whale. So we had to name it. It's actually a whale that goes back to 1996, documented off Southern California. We did deploy one of those limpet satellite tags on it. It tracked its movement all the way down to the Galapagos Island area. So it spends, looks like months feeding off Southern California, alternating with migrations down to tropical areas. Again, not really breakthrough information. We knew adult male humpback sperm whales did that, but actually being able to document it in this case was good. So this is, you know, the rather leisurely approach of a sperm whale because we've been able to use acoustics to maneuver. We're in a pretty good spot when it first came up, and it's going to log at the surface for a long time. So we can use this incredibly slow, gradual approach to just ease in on it. Absolutely no change in engine RPMs. Try not to alarm it. We actually find we're more successful coming from the front or the side rather than behind. So the whale knows we're here. It seems to almost work better. But you just come in and you're not a threat. And of course now it's going to respond once you tap it with something. So that was putting it on a sperm whale. And then I'm going to show you something maybe, you know, when we talk about Navy sonar and, you know, the pioneering work and really breakthrough work done on the threat of Navy sonar to whales has come from Ken's work in the Bahamas. And, you know, a prime species of concern has been beaked whales. And so in this study that I'm going to show you some data from, we have also tried to work with a variety of species, including beaked whales. And for example, this is deploying a tag on Cuvier's beaked whales. And in this case, having to make a rather fast approach because the animals were far away and we knew if we didn't get there, they could be down for an hour or more. So we're actually coming in pretty quick. to position when we get in the area. This is Ari Freelander telling me to slow down, that we're there. And then we'll kind of position and try to track these animals underwater. He's giving me information. You can see it's a group of animals. There's several. There's 2 on our left, 1 on our right, but we're actually tracking 1 off the bow here and trying to be in the right spot. Okay. Down the right, there's one animal up on the right. Okay. Okay. So he's giving me distances of how far away the animal is. Okay. In direction he can see it underwater better than I can, and I try to just hold our spot. So that's a pretty aggressive approach. I mean, normally, I'm much. I don't know if you caught that we missed that high five. Anyway, everyone's really excited. So partly they're excited because this was one of those cases we had deployed these types of tags on a number of beaked whales and done playback with that sound source. But what we knew was occurring at this point is we knew there was a Navy destroyer that was in the region. It was about 30, 40 miles away. And if we got a tag on this animal, we would actually have one of the first cases where we would have an animal with this high resolution tag gathering data at the time of an actual Navy use of sonar. Okay, and I think I'll show you just a few more kind of getting back to the maybe, blue whale, baleen whale part. For example, this is an animal doing a lunge feed. We don't have sound on this one, but it's kind of interesting that it's on a blue whale. It's on the left side of the blue whale. You'll see the head in the blowhole. You'll actually see this animal rotate its head around. It'll spot something. The pec fin comes out on the left, and now it angles towards the surface. And right up here is a ball of krill. And it's accelerating up. These undulations are the whale. It's accelerating up to that ball of krill, and there it is engulfing it. And this animal did that hundreds of times, throughout that deployment. That was off San Diego. We did capture in a few cases, what's the loudest sound made by any animal. This is a blue whale vocalizing. And you'll see there's another blue whale that will come into the view up to the right here. That thumping sound is what's called the A call of a blue whale, of an eastern North Pacific blue whale. Here's the other blue whale. So he's going to do this call. This whale swims by, and now this whale accelerates after it. And with these tags, what we've been able to do is identify that these animals producing these loud broadcast calls were only males. So it was a call more related to reproduction. There had been speculation of a number of other roles that blue whales might be using this loud call for, but it turned out it was a male-only call, primarily produced by males when they were solitary and traveling, but when they were paired with another animal that do these intermittent calls as well. Now I'm going to show you just, everything I'm going to show you from now on is some data from just this past year. We've been doing some other deployments of tags. This is something, it's upside down right now, but it'll go right side up in a second. This is a new tag developed by Cetacean Animal Technology, Custom Animal Tracking Solutions, CATS. And they're working with us and Jeremy Goldbogen, who's now at Stanford. So here's our whale right here coming into view. This is actually 2 cameras aimed at 90-degree angles to each other. So here we are, this is the camera filming, and we're waiting for the whale to surface here, and then the camera goes on the whale. And now we get this, clearer view than what we were getting from the critter cam of the animal's movements. The neat thing about this new tag is it combines the video with high-resolution kinematics. In other words, all of those movement parameters and dive parameters sampled at a high rate are on this tag as well. And so we were able to get that in combination with the video, which we weren't able to get. We had to sort of choose between the two before. And this is an animal, this is off Southern California. Again, I want to say this was August or September of this past year that we deployed this tag. And I think I may jump around a little bit here to get you a few little views of what this animal is doing, because it ends up doing a series of lunges that we'll catch. So let me see if I can, actually let me do this, that'll be better. Go with a high speed, and we'll catch some of the lunges of what this animal was doing. And again, this is another one of these tags that goes out for just a matter of hours on the animal. So again, this is a little bit of an acceleration. You see another blue whale to the left, and there's one of those lunges. And you can see the krill going by the camera here. So that's kind of the sort of lunges that this is capturing. Let's just look at a couple more of those, and then I can go back to my presentation here in a second. Here again, you see krill capture a couple of lunges here. Now, in a few cases, you'll actually see this tag slide on the animal because with these suction, like right there, that tag is sliding down the back of the animal. And you can actually see a little bit of the track it leaves because these animals are sloughing skin constantly. So you can almost see a little bit where it slid along the back of the animal. And it's interesting, it gave us kind of a little bit of an interesting view to have it slide back and give us two different angles, if you will. So there it is. You can see the high degree of maneuvering this whale is doing to get to that ball of krill. And there it is, and that's its throat cleat extending out as it does one of these lunges. And so I'm going to show you one more of those because this one's sort of bizarre. The tag slides way back, I think, on this one. Yes, this is. I don't quite even know why it reattaches here, but we'll see. I think this is the one. So right now, this is about halfway down the lengths of the animal, and then you can see it starting to slide a little bit right there. And as the animal accelerates, the tag goes way back to near the tail, but then somehow reattaches, and now we have this kind of view from way behind the whale near the tail of the distended throat cleats. And then I'll just show you, let's see, sorry, I thought I had one more in here that I wanted to show, but I'm not seeing it. Okay, I'll show you, I just wanted to show you this reconstruction of what we can do with this data. And so this is, first of all, let me just back up. So this is data from one of those tags, except using a program called Track Plot that lets us reconstruct all the movements of the whale. So in this case, this program lets us not only create the movement of the whale, but visualize it any way we want. So in this case here, we're looking straight down on the reconstructed underwater track of the whale. So this ribbon is everywhere the whale went. And this is where the whale is. And we'll kind of, you can do this real time, but in this case, this is just the video of it. And so in this case, we'll move down, kind of zoom down on it. So that's all the track of the whale. And then we can go for a different perspective. So now we're still straight above the whale. And now we can switch our perspective to a sideways one. And now these set of bars here, yeah, you see my cursor, shows the depth of the whale. And then that's the ribbon, that's everywhere the whale's going to go. And then we can put the thing into motion at about 10 times normal speed and track what the whale actually does and to visualize its movements. And all of this helps not only to better understand how these whales are feeding, but it's also critical to this part of understanding their behavioral change that might occur in response to things like Navy sonar or ship noise. So now we've started this moving at 10 times normal speed, and you can actually see the undulations of the whale, and that's a roll where it did a feeding bout. Anyway, you can basically rebuild all of this whale's movements with that kind of fine scale data. Okay, let me jump back to my presentation here on this. Okay. So part of our goal early on in doing these types of deployment was just to understand the feeding behavior of whales, how they dive, how deep they dive, how do they capture prey, and there are a series of publications that have come out on that. And that was sort of the first goal of the use of these tags. And all of these publications, by the way, are available on our website. But now, in more recent years, we've been using these tags to look at various human impacts and how behavior might change. One of the threats we started out looking at in 2007 was ship strikes. And that was because in the fall of 2007, there were 5 blue whales, minimum, that were struck and killed by ships off Southern California in just a few-month period. And what was troubling to me is that from tracking blue whale populations and strandings, I knew that we only recover a tiny proportion of the blue whales that die. Most of them likely sink at sea. You saw from the tag data that these animals are negatively buoyant below a certain depth and will just sink. And it looked to us like probably less than 5% of the animals that die actually show up as a stranding. So if you end up with strandings documenting 5 ship strikes, in my mind, that could easily be 20 times that many are occurring for real. So that got us very concerned about ship strikes. And especially in the case of these fall 2007, these all occurred down in the Southern California Bight, an area, this is Santa Barbara here, LA Long Beach is just over here, and the shipping lanes go through the Santa Barbara Channel, an area that we had repeatedly documented pretty regular and high concentrations of blue whales. So we had an intersection of the primary vessel traffic coming to the busiest port we have in the eastern North Pacific, intersecting with this high concentrated feeding area for blue whales. And that was the area that these ship strikes occurred. So in particular, we wanted to understand what were blue whales doing in that area. Was there something about blue whales in particular that made them more vulnerable to ship strikes than some of the other species like humpbacks that occur in the area? And also to understand how things like slowing ships down or altering ship routes could improve or reduce the incidence of ship strike. You really needed much better data on how these whales are distributed and how they were responding to ship strikes and why they were getting hit. So that was part of our goal. And I'm pulling from another piece of data here. In the Pacific Northwest, we have a stranding network that responds to whale strandings. And here I've just pulled in 10-year periods what proportion of the large whale strandings showed evidence of ship strike. And you can see in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, it was down around 5%. And then really it's been in the last 15 years that we've seen almost a third of the large whales that we examine show signs of having been struck by ships. So it's a growing threat. Shipping traffic has become far more intense. The ships have become larger and the ships have become faster. All factors that would make them more lethal to whales. Okay. So a lot of our focus in recent years has been doing work right in these areas where there's heavy ship traffic. Deploying some of these tags, like that's a blue whale with a suction cup tag, and then being able to follow and monitor that animal and how it responds to ships. It's also led us to identify where we have locations, where we have these intersections of whale feeding and high vessel traffic. And some of that's been already useful. In the Gulf of the Farallones and off Southern California, last year, the shipping lanes were moved. And they were moved for several reasons, but part of what was involved in the choice of where they were moved to was some of this data on whale distribution. So for example, in the Gulf of the Farallones, there are 3 entrances that come into San Francisco Bay. And the one that looked like was the most serious threat to humpback and blue whales was this western lane used by the majority of the ships. And previously, this shipping lane used to come closer to the Farallon Islands, and it also used to end right at the shelf edge. And our concentration of whales, which you can see here, this is effort-corrected sighting rates of, I think this is humpback whales, is primarily concentrated along that shelf edge. And here, the Farallon Islands, you can see along a band like this. So when that shipping lane ended here, all the ships coming from the north or south leading to that ship would tend to come up along the edge and then turn into the lane. And so part of what occurred is these lanes were moved south, they were made longer, and they were extended out into deeper water. So that meant ships now coming from other areas would not travel along that area of dense concentration. So this looks like it would be a major improvement. In Southern California, the shipping lanes were moved slightly, but it was only 1 nautical mile. So it was a pretty modest shift in the shipping lanes, but it was in the direction, again, to reduce their overlap with the prime feeding area for blue whales down there. Another thing we discovered is that from looking at our tag data, and this is taking a blue whale dive record, going from, this is a tag that was on a blue whale, this is depth, how deep the whale was diving. All of these lines are the dive of a blue whale. And this shaded area shows the behavior of that whale at night. And this was data that came up repeatedly with blue whales, that blue whales undergo a pretty dramatic shift in their diving behavior between day and night. They're sometimes feeding near the surface in the day, but they're most typically going down to a deep prey layer and feeding down there. These are deep lunges down to a prey layer. And at night, they go more into a resting behavior at the surface. And I won't belabor this slide, but the take-home message of this slide is when we put all that data together, it showed that blue whales would be twice as likely to be in the zone where they would be impacted by a ship at night than they are in the day. And right away that suggested it was kind of a revelation to me, because all of our data about what blue whales were doing and where they were came from daytime sighting data. And all of a sudden I realized what was really more important is where were they and what were they doing at night? Because the shipping traffic goes 24 hours a day. So it's changed our thinking, and it turns out these blue whales not only dive differently, but their movement patterns are pretty different. In the night, this is a nighttime in black, daytime in white, concentrated in one area feeding in the daytime, but then making kind of more a meandering route at night, finally returning to the area where it had success feeding. So that was really useful information, and it kind of also showed that, just having ships try to steer to avoid whales, that's not going to work if the main threat comes at night when you can't see whales. We also discovered blue whales did very little to avoid ships. We could track the movements of blue whales with these tags and visual data and see what happened when a ship came through. Here in orange is the movements of a whale. In yellow is the track of a ship. And the white arrow shows where the whale was and what direction it was headed at the time of closest approach with that ship. And this is 2 cases, and it turned out that it was in more than half the cases, the whale actually kept closing the gap with the ship at that critical moment. In this case here, this was a case where the whale dove right here, the ship went by, and the whale surfaced on the other side of the ship. It actually had kept traveling in this direction. This white arrow shows where the whale was at the time the ship was here, and then the whale just kept going, traveled underneath the ship. And I'll show you a couple of other examples. So it seemed like blue whales were not doing anything to, at least in that horizontal plane, to avoid these ships, even in these very close near-miss situations. We also studied their dive behavior. What did these whales do when they had ships really close to them? And the take-home message there was not much of a response, and if anything, we tended to see them linger at the surface right after they had a close approach with a ship. Again, not the response you'd want to see. And I'm going to show you something even a little more detailed. We had a few cases in our data, and now we have more of it, of what looked like an almost collision between a whale and a ship. So this is taking data on the ship in red, on the whale movements in blue. And actually, this is a tag that had a GPS on it, so we weren't actually with this animal at the time this occurred. And I'm going to play this animation. This will show the dive of the whale and what it's doing, and it's going to match up with that blue track. Okay, so let's watch this quick animation. I nabbed it. Well, maybe we won't watch that animation. Oh, there it is. Okay. So it's not moving very well. There it is. So right there, oh, I didn't quite stop. I wasn't able to stop it. But basically what you saw in that animation is that intersection We'll watch it again, see if I can stop it. Right there, the two intersected. And the interesting thing that surprised us was that when we looked at the dive record and what the whale did, it actually seemed to do this very shallow dip dive right at the time that the ship virtually went over the top of it. So it may have made a small vertical avoidance dive. Okay. Now this year, those came from last year. This is just photographs from this past year, 2014. And we actually had a really intense season with blue whales that were concentrated in shipping lanes. These are just photos from a couple of different encounters where we had blue whales, in this case a blue whale with one of these suction cup attached tags, and you can see it's right in the path of ships. This is an example I'll show you in a second. One thing I mentioned is that we only get the data on these tags if we get the tag back. And tag recovery turned out to be a little bit of an adventure this past year. So I've highlighted a few things. We had one recovery of one of our tags that went out that we thought was gone, but more than a month later, apparently the VHF, the radio beacon, had failed on it. A kayaker discovered it floating. Again, it was some 100 miles away from where we had deployed it in a kelp bed, and we got it back. Two of our medium-term deployments, these were deployments I'm going to talk about in a second. The whales actually swam down to Mexico before the tags came off, and came off in Baja. One of them came off near the time that hurricane was coming through, so we had to deal with that. I had my first tag recovery that involved a bicycle chase. And this was a tag that came off the whale. It was floating. We got a bead on it from land with our radio, with our directional antenna. But then when I went out on the boat, it was gone. And I couldn't figure out what had happened. And then finally, on a hunch, went to the top of the Palos Verdes Peninsula and listened with my radio and antenna. And I could hear the detection, but it was coming from inland. But as soon as I got off my high point, I couldn't find it. So finally, I had to charter a plane, fly around it. I figured out it was somewhere in the neighborhood of Carson City High School, any of you know, LA. And then I went to that neighborhood, and I had my truck, and we had boat research going on, and for some reason, I don't quite know why, but it turned out to be very useful. I had thrown my bicycle into the back of my truck, thinking maybe it would be useful. And it was really hard to track from inside the car, inside my pickup truck. And I tried walking around, and finally I realized this tag was still moving. And I figured it had to be in someone's car. I got pretty close to it, but then it would fade away. And the only way I could track it was I finally realized I could get on my bicycle, and now I could track while I rode. And so it took about an hour, and finally it led me to this Home Depot parking lot. And at first I thought it was coming from inside the Home Depot. But then I realized it was this car parked in the handicap zone right at the entrance. So here you can see my bike, and so I just kind of wait there. And finally this family comes out. And the son speaks English, but the mother and daughter only spoke Spanish. And it was, I'd been at sea a month. I didn't look real good. I was already getting pretty suspicious glances by the employees as I rode my bike with this antenna around. But I could tell the tag was in the back of that. It's a kind of Ford Expedition there. So I kind of went for it, said, hey, I'm a researcher, I'm on land, I deployed a tag on a whale last week, and it has a radio signal on it, and I've been tracking it, and I think it's in the back of your truck right here. And they're kind of quiet and having some conversations, and I realized I better press my advantage. I said, and I said, well, and I think you live, and I gave where I'd gotten a pretty close hit, and you were there an hour ago, and then you started running errands, and I kind of gave them their route every time. And I can see at that point I kind of had them, and you just kind of opened up the back, and there's my tag sitting there. And we had a bit of a moment because he started to go, well, actually my dad found this in Santa Monica Bay 2 days ago, and I can't give it to you, it's my dad found it. And I'm going, well, I'm only on shore today, and I have $100 I can give you. And he's going, I don't know, my dad might want to discuss, more, So finally, I gave him my card, and I said, you know, your dad can contact me, you know, here's my phone number, email, and he kind of does this little thing like this, like, show me the money, you know, so I had to have $100 in my hand, and we did this $100 for the tag. And we got that tag back.
Wow.
And this was, you know, we had a number of these. This was another particularly important encounter that we had. This was actually a ship, the Mokahana, that goes between LA and Hawaii. And this was a whale we had tagged as part of our study of the Navy sonar response.